Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're looking at a really fascinating set of sources you've shared. They seem to map out a major strategic shift happening in the Middle East. And it's complex because it's not just about politics or just about religion. It feels like a deliberate fusion of the two. We're talking about these two huge initiatives appearing, now being linked together. On one hand, you have the very geopolitical, very diplomatic Abrahamic Accords. And on the other, this cultural soft power initiative, the Abrahamic family house. Your sources suggest these aren't just running in parallel. The idea is they're meant to converge, right, under this banner of Abraham, all aimed at creating regional stability, a kind of lasting normalization. Okay, let's unpack this. Our mission today is to get the facts straight on both initiatives first, and then really dig into the core theory from these sources that this convergence is the strategy, the mechanism being built to achieve peace and security, which, according to this framework, has some pretty deep eschatological weight.
That's absolutely right. We have to ground it in reality first. The central argument in this material, it boils down to this. The conflict there is fundamentally religious. So any purely political fix is, well, seen as doomed to fail. Only something sanctioned religiously, using Abraham, the common ancestor, only that can be sold as the final answer. But yeah, let's start with the politics. The Accords.
Right, the hard geopolitical anchor. What are the nuts and bolts of the Abraham Accords?
Okay, so the Accords. They're a series of diplomatic agreements, mostly brokered by the U.S., signed back in 2020, and they achieve full normalization. We're talking embassies, trade, defense ties, the works, between Israel and 4 key Arab and Muslim majority states.
The UAE, Bahrain,
Sudan, and Morocco. Yes.
You really can't overstate how big a deal this was. Arguably the most significant shift in Middle East diplomacy since, what, Egypt in 79, Jordan in 94?
Exactly. It effectively shattered that decades-long Arab consensus, the one that basically said no normalization with Israel until there's peace with the Palestinians.
So why then? Why 2020? What changed?
Well, the why is really rooted in mutual necessity. Pragmatism, the biggest strategic driver. Shared regional worries. Specifically, Iran's growing influence and, let's say, destabilizing actions.
So, strange bedfellows. Cooperating with Israel on security suddenly made sense for some Gulf states.
It became a priority, yes. Intelligence sharing, defense cooperation.
And beyond security, there must have been economic drivers, too.
Oh, huge. Absolutely enormous. The Accords instantly unlocked massive potential. Trade, tech transfer, tourism investment, defense deals. You look at states like the UAE with their Vision 2030 goals.
Right, focused on modernization, economic diversification.
Exactly. So they prioritized that integration over the older, maybe more confrontational foreign policy stances. It created this immediate, very tangible set of benefits.
And that benefit structure is probably crucial to why it's seen as working, at least for the signatories.
It is. But, as your source material points out very clearly, the Accords were controversial from day one because they deliberately uncoupled the normalization process from solving the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
And there's the split. Proponents said, look, maybe cooperation gives us leverage later to help the Palestinians.
Right. But the act itself, normalizing relations without that resolution.
Palestinian leadership and many others in the region saw it as a total betrayal.
A profound abandonment of that core land for peace principle.
So, stability for some, but potentially less leverage for the Palestinians.
That's the tension, yes.
Okay, so that's the political and economic foundation laid bare. Now, let's pivot. Let's look at the other anchor, the religious, the cultural diplomacy side. The part meant to give this new order symbolic legitimacy.
Right, and that brings us squarely to the Abrahamic family house. Now, unlike the Accords, this is presented as purely a cultural and interfaith initiative, launched by the UAE's Higher Committee of Human Fraternity, announced 2019, opened its doors in Abu Dhabi in 2023.
And the location itself is significant, right? Saadiyat Island, it's a major cultural hub.
It's designed to be a highly visible architectural landmark symbolizing global tolerance. And architecturally, symbolically, it's quite profound. You have 3 distinct houses of worship, a mosque, a church, a synagogue, standing side by side, sharing a common foundation, a perimeter wall, and alongside them, a shared forum space, specifically for interfaith dialogue.
What's interesting, too, is the origin story the sources highlight. It wasn't just out of the blue.
No, not at all. The inspiration is directly traced back to Pope Francis's visit to the UAE in 2019. and importantly, the signing of that document on human fraternity.
With the Grand Imam of Al-Azhar, Ahmed El-Tayeb.
Precisely. So the stated goal of the family house is pretty straightforward. Demonstrate religious coexistence, promote mutual respect, dialogue between the three Abrahamic faiths, basically frame tolerance not just as an idea, but as an achievable political goal.
So if the Accords are the geopolitical structure,
The foundation, yes.
and the family house provides the symbolic blessing or legitimacy, the question your source really forces us to confront is, what's the plan here? What happens when you pull both levers at once?
And the source argues this synergy isn't just convenient, it's absolutely intentional. A coordinated strategy. Both initiatives strategically use the name Abraham. Why? To bridge that religious divide.
Creating a common identity narrative.
Exactly. One that underpins the diplomatic cooperation. The UAE is essentially marketing this whole package as a new era of tolerance, where normalization isn't just about defense deals, it's framed as a kind of moral imperative.
Which leads us straight to the core theory in your source material, that these two things, currently separate initiatives,
Will eventually be officially merged, or at least presented as two sides of the same coin.
into one unified, all-encompassing strategy, presented to the world as the, quote, final solution for regional conflict.
For lasting stability, yeah.
The definitive path to peace and security.
And the source insists this convergence is necessary because, in its view, the conflict's root is spiritual. It's intractable by purely secular means. Global powers try, but they miss the religious core, according to this view. So, to achieve that definitive peace and security, a phrase the source uses very pointedly, very prophetically.
The religious narrative itself has to be synthesized, managed, controlled.
And that synthesis, according to this material, is the job of a specific key end times figure.
Okay. Now we are definitely shifting gears. We're moving away from the verifiable facts of the Accords in the family house into the highly speculative, interpretive lens your source applies to these events. And this is where the stakes, according to the source, become truly existential.
Absolutely. And we really need to stress this. What follows is purely the eschatological interpretation found in this specific source material. We're reporting on the source's claims here. This framework connects this coming fusion, political stability plus religious unity directly to the figure of the biblical Antichrist or the false prophet.
And how does the source see this figure fitting into the Abraham narrative?
The source claims this individual will be perceived simultaneously by different faiths as their expected figure. For Jews, the Messiah, the Mashiach ben David. For Muslims, the Mahdi. For certain Christians, specifically those adhering to what the source calls an apostate or ecumenical version of Christianity, the returning Jesus.
So the Abraham label becomes the perfect umbrella, the common ground.
The ideal ecumenical banner for this figure to unite under, yes.
A powerful narrative. But the source goes further. It suggests a very dramatic move to seal this deal, centered on the most contested site on earth, the Temple Mount in Jerusalem.
That's right. The source posits that to truly solidify this peace, this covenant with the many as it's often termed, the model seen in Abu Dhabi, the three houses of Abraham's faith, would essentially be replicated right there on the Temple Mount plateau itself.
Wow. How would that even work? What's the specific arrangement proposed in this theory?
According to this material, it breaks down like this. First, Jews are permitted to finally build their long-awaited third temple. Second, Muslims retain use of the Dome of the Rock, which, interestingly, the source links symbolically to the ASEAN and the color gold.
Okay.
Third, and this is a really crucial and frankly highly controversial claim within this specific interpretation, the source asserts that the Al-Aqsa Mosque isn't originally Islamic, but is actually an ancient Crusader chapel.
That's a specific historical viewpoint found in some prophetic circles, not mainstream history.
Correct. And in this proposed scenario, that site, Al-Aqsa, would be relinquished back to Christians. The source links this symbolically to the moon and the color gray.
So you have the Jewish temple representing stars in white, the dome sun gold, and Al-Aqsa moon gray.
That's the tripartite structure proposed.
The detail about the colors and even the link to Orion's belt stars, Alnitak, Anilam, and Taka, it shows the intricate level of specific, almost esoteric justification the author uses to build this theory.
It does.
But proposing any change like this on the Temple Mount, the volatility is almost unimaginable.
Yet, the source argues this exact move, satisfying key desires of elements within all three faiths, is the necessary mechanism, the thing required to finally achieve that global peace and security. But critically, and this is the core of the source's warning, this resulting stability is seen as profoundly deceptive, universally deceptive, across all three religious traditions that have dissenting voices.
That's quite something, a convergence of end times warnings. Does the source suggest if these groups or parts of them realize it's deceptive?
It implies that, yes, dissenting factions within Judaism, Christianity, and Islam will recognize the deception, but they'll likely be marginalized, overwhelmed by the global celebration of peace, the powerful ecumenical push, the geopolitical consensus.
So how does each tradition, according to the source, interpret this false peace? Let's start with Christian eschatology.
In Christian eschatology, this fusion, this peace deal, is seen as the direct trigger for the tribulation period. The source points directly to the Apostle Paul's warning, 1 Thessalonians 5:3, when they say, peace and security, then sudden destruction comes.
And this peace deal is identified as the covenant?
Yes, the covenant the Antichrist makes, which is famously broken halfway through a 7-year period leading into the Great Tribulation described in Daniel and Revelation.
Okay. What about Jewish eschatology? How does the source frame their interpretation?
Well, according to the source, many Orthodox rabbis would view these kinds of interfaith mergers and the resulting peace as extremely dangerous, a form of premature messianism, a false peace established before the true Mashiach ben David arrives. The source references prophecies, like in Zechariah, that speak of nations gathering against Jerusalem after an attempt at imposing some kind of stability fails.
So a deceptive prelude to the real event.
Precisely.
And finally, Islamic eschatology. How does the source claim this specific kind of peace treaty, especially one involving Jerusalem so directly, would be viewed?
Any peace initiative seen as diminishing the ultimate Islamic claim or sovereignty over Jerusalem would be viewed with deep suspicion. The term fitna comes up meaning trial, tribulation, or deception. There's anticipation in some traditions of a deceptive treaty, sometimes called a hudna.
A temporary truce.
A temporary, possibly deceptive truce that precedes the major end times conflicts or wars. So the source is quite emphatic. This Abrahamic merger, however much the world celebrates it, is interpreted within these specific eschatological frameworks across all three faiths as the dangerous precursor to final conflicts.
Right. So the fusion is designed, intended perhaps, to bring about a golden age, global celebration, a world tired of war embracing stability.
That's the presentation, yes.
But the source insists there's an inevitable failure point, a built-in self-destruct.
A breaking point, which it predicts happens exactly at the midpoint of that 7-year tribulation period, the moment the covenant is broken.
And that's when the fragile peace and security shatters.
Yes, collapsing into what the Bible calls the Great Tribulation.
And interestingly, the source suggests the collapse isn't primarily from internal dissent among the signatories.
No, it's triggered by massive external forces.
Forces challenging the Antichrist figure's control, specifically over the Promised Land, Jerusalem, the Temple Mount.
Exactly. The source describes major global power blocks moving against his authority. It specifically mentions the emergence of the kings of the East.
And cites a literal army size.
Yes, what the material claims is literally a 200 million man army, drawing on revelation. A force driven by geopolitics, yes, but energized, according to the source, by spiritual imperatives.
The specific number aside, the key point from the source's perspective is
that the Antichrist's peace ultimately fails, not just because it was flawed, but because it's overwhelmed by these massive, divinely permitted external challenges. Confirming in this view that the initial peace agreement was always meant to be temporary and deceptive.
So wrapping this up, what does it all mean, according to this analysis? The source concludes that this grand merger, political, economic, religious, symbolic, while looking incredibly comprehensive, maybe even positive on the surface,
is ultimately destined, within this framework, to be short-lived.
A deceptive setup for a final existential conflict.
A conflict that this framework suggests only direct divine intervention can ultimately resolve.
Okay, so the big takeaway for you listening is really understanding this reported strategy, the simultaneous creation and intentional linking of these two powerful initiatives.
The Geo-Political Abraham Accords on one side delivering tangible security, economic benefits, and the religious Abrahamic family house on the other offering cultural tolerance, interfaith coexistence.
And this combined model is being presented, according to the source, as the blueprint, the intended final solution for Middle East conflict, and perhaps a model for global issues too.
That's the core assertion being analyzed here.
And just to leave you with a final provocative thought, something that builds on this material, the source implies that this whole modern fusion strategy, this Abrahamic coexistence model centered on Jerusalem, it actually echoes, maybe even resurrects, some of the very earliest international plans for the city. Remember, after World War II, The UN's original partition plan included making Jerusalem an international city, a corpus separatum.
Ruled by an international regime, potentially involving interfaith elements.
Exactly. An interfaith council shared by the Abrahamic faiths was part of that early vision. So how does history rhyme or even repeat even within these kinds of apocalyptic interpretations? Is the same model of ecumenical governance, once proposed by the UN, now being resurrected through the Accords and the Family House as the key to geopolitical stability?
Something to think about.
We definitely encourage you to maybe look into the history of that original UN proposal for Jerusalem and consider its parallels, or lack thereof, with these modern efforts towards interfaith geopolitical solutions.